HOA Karen destroyed my son's wheelchair ramp while he was still on it. It happened in less than 30 seconds, but it felt like time had frozen, like the universe held its breath while my world collapsed around my son. One moment, my 8-year-old boy, Liam, was smiling, clutching his favorite toy car as he slowly wheeled down the wooden ramp we had installed just 3 months earlier. The next moment, a loud crack, the ground trembling beneath him, the agonizing sound of splintering wood, and then his scream. I was just pulling into the driveway when I saw it happen. There she was, Karen, blonde bob bouncing with every furious stomp, her lips twisted into that familiar sneer, gripping what looked like a steel crowbar with white knuckles. She didn't see me. Not yet. All she saw was the ramp, the thing she'd been complaining about in every HOA meeting, in every email, every typed letter shoved under our door. She claimed it was unesthetic, non-compliant, and lowering property values. But this wasn't just wood and nails. This ramp was Liam's freedom, and she smashed it. With a grunt, Karen swung the crowbar once, then again. The support beam snapped. My son screamed. A neighbor shouted. I leapt from the car, my keys still in the ignition, feet barely touching the gravel as I ran. Liam's wheelchair tipped sideways. He was halfway down the incline when the structure gave way beneath him. The wheels twisted, one lifting in the air, the ramp sagging, then collapsing altogether. He hit the side of the porch hard, crumpling sideways, wedged between the railing and broken wood. For a second, I couldn't breathe. I knelt next to him, heart pounding in my ears louder than the sirens I would soon hear. His face was pale, tear-streaked, lips trembling in pain and confusion. His little fingers gripped my sleeve, so tightly they shook. "Daddy," he whispered, barely able to speak. "Why did she break it?" Karen stood back, eyes wide, as if surprised by what she'd done, maybe even horrified. But it was too late for regret. And as the neighbors began to gather, as someone called 911, as I cradled my crying son in my arms, she said the one thing that burned itself into my memory forever: "You should have followed the HOA rules." That was her excuse. That was her reason. Not concern, not apology, not even shame. Just cold, entitled justification. What she didn't know, what she never expected, was that this moment wouldn't just shatter a ramp. It would shatter her world, too. Because that day, something inside me ignited. Something deep. A fire I couldn't ignore. A father's fury. And I wasn't going to stop until she, the HOA, and every single person who turned a blind eye was held accountable. This wasn't just about a ramp. It was about respect. It was about safety. It was about standing up when the system tries to silence you, especially when your child can't stand on his own. And this is how it all began. Before that awful day, our life was simple. Not perfect, but peaceful in the ways that mattered most. My wife, Emily, and I had moved to Willow Creek 2 years ago, hoping to give our son a safer, quieter life. Liam was born with a spinal condition, spina bifida, which left him paralyzed from the waist down. The wheelchair wasn't just a necessity, it was his lifeline to independence. Willow Creek, with its tree-lined streets and slow suburban pace, felt like the ideal neighborhood to raise a child with special needs. The houses were charming, the lawns meticulously trimmed, and every neighbor greeted you with a smile, at least in the beginning. We bought a small, single-story home on the corner of Magnolia Lane. It needed work, sure, peeling paint, a leaky faucet or two, but the backyard was big enough for Liam to roll around freely, and the school nearby had excellent accessibility facilities. We thought we had made the right choice. Shortly after we moved in, Emily and I started building a wooden wheelchair ramp from our front door to the driveway. It wasn't anything fancy, just a simple, sturdy incline crafted with love by my hands and a few YouTube tutorials. It met all ADA requirements. More importantly, it allowed Liam to get outside on his own. The first time he used it, he zoomed down, laughing, his hair ruffled by the wind. We took videos. We cried. It was a milestone for all of us. That joy didn't last long. The first complaint came just 2 days after we finished the ramp. A note in our mailbox, no name, no signature. Just, This structure is not approved. It violates HOA aesthetics. Remove immediately. We were stunned. I checked the HOA handbook. It didn't say anything about ramps, not clearly. There were vague clauses about uniform property appearances and non-permanent structural additions requiring approval, but no mention of accessibility-related exemptions. We reached out to the HOA directly. The reply was curt. They asked for blueprints, permits, and a formal application. I tried explaining that this was an accessibility feature for our disabled child, not a backyard gazebo or a pool. But they didn't care. Then we met her, Karen Montgomery. She was the HOA president, a woman in her late 50s who walked around with a clipboard like she was auditing the entire neighborhood. The first time she came to our door, it was under the pretense of discussing compliance. But from the moment I opened the door, it was clear this wasn't a discussion. It was a threat wrapped in politeness. She scanned our porch like a hawk, her lips tightening. "We've had concerns raised," she said. "Your structure isn't in harmony with the visual layout of the community." She tilted her head toward the ramp, "and it's a tripping hazard for guests." Emily stood beside me, shocked. "That's our son's wheelchair ramp," she said firmly. Karen didn't flinch. "Yes, and I sympathize, but rules are rules. We can't play favorites." Play favorites? From that day on, Karen became a permanent figure in our lives, lurking, watching, documenting. She would drive past slowly, stopping to take photos of our ramp. She'd walk by and loudly mention HOA violations to her phone, making sure we could hear her. And then came the letters, dozens of them, some printed, some handwritten, each more aggressive than the last. Fines began to accumulate. HOA violation fees, $50, then $100, then $250, all for refusing to tear down a ramp that gave our child a sense of dignity. We weren't alone in feeling her wrath. The Johnsons down the street were fined for painting their mailbox blue. The Parkers had to remove their solar lights. Karen ran the HOA like her personal kingdom. But none of those cases were about something as serious as accessibility. We tried appealing. We attended meetings, made formal presentations, brought in a letter from Liam's doctor, and even offered to repaint the ramp to match the house. Nothing worked. Karen was unmoved, hiding behind the bylaws like armor. "You should have gotten approval before building," she would say again and again, as if Liam's disability came with a waiting period. We could see the toll it was taking on him. Liam began asking why the neighbors didn't like him, why they wanted to take away his ramp. "Did I do something bad, Dad?" he asked one night, tears in his eyes. That question broke me. The cruelty wasn't just in the rules, it was in the silence. Most of the neighborhood stood by. No one defended us publicly. A few offered sympathetic looks or whispered, "Hang in there," but no one was willing to stand up to Karen. Fear ruled the street. Still, we held our ground. We documented everything, the letters, the photos, the meeting minutes, just in case. Then, one afternoon, Liam asked if he could go outside and race his toy cars down the ramp. It was a rare moment of happiness. Emily and I were inside folding laundry, listening through the open window. The birds chirped, the wind blew softly, and then the sound of wood snapping. A scream, and everything changed. After the collapse of the ramp, our lives spiraled into a whirlwind of emergency rooms, police reports, and a neighborhood on edge. Liam was lucky, a sprained wrist, some bruises, and deep emotional trauma. But it could have been far worse. The paramedics said another angle, another few inches, and he could have fractured his spine. I didn't sleep that night. Neither did Emily. We sat by Liam's bedside, watching him sleep through the painkillers. His tiny arm was wrapped in a bright blue cast. His wheelchair sat beside the bed, wheels covered in dirt and splinters from the crash. The police arrived late that evening. I told them everything, the threats, the photos, the complaints, and finally, the moment I saw Karen destroy the ramp with her own hands. A few neighbors backed me up. Most stayed quiet. When the officer knocked on Karen's door, she opened it with a robe on and a glass of wine in her hand. She smiled as if she had been expecting them. "I was just doing what the HOA should have done months ago," she said casually. "If the father won't follow the rules, someone has to." She admitted it, out loud, in front of a badge. But the officer hesitated. "It's a civil matter," he said. "You might want to take this up with your HOA attorney." I was stunned. She destroyed my son's medical ramp. That's vandalism. That's assault. He nodded, took notes, filed a report, and left. That was when I realized something. Karen didn't just think she was above the law. She believed the law was on her side. And maybe in that moment was the next HOA meeting was the following Tuesday. We showed up with photos of the ramp, the damage Liam's cast, and a printed timeline of every harassment letter Karen had sent. We stood in front of the board, 7 people, none of whom had children with disabilities, and made our case. Karen sat at the center, arms folded, eyes cold. When I finished, she cleared her throat and spoke. "We regret the child was injured. However, the structure in question was unauthorized and did not follow the HOA architectural guidelines. The president acted out of concern for compliance and neighborhood uniformity. That was it. No suspension. No fine. Not even a warning." I wanted to scream. That night, Liam cried in his sleep. Emily cried in the kitchen. And I stood in the garage, staring at the mangled pieces of the ramp, feeling something shift inside me. Anger, yes, but also something sharper, purpose. I made a decision. If no one was going to protect my son, I would. The next day, I called a disability rights attorney. Her name was Alicia Grant, sharp, compassionate, and fierce as hell. The moment I told her what happened, she said, "This isn't just a neighbor dispute. It's a violation of federal disability law." She explained the Fair Housing Act and ADA Title III and how denying or destroying accessibility accommodations could be seen as discrimination. Even if the HOA claimed compliance issues, destroying a medical ramp, especially with a child on it, was indefensible. We filed a formal lawsuit against both the HOA and Karen personally. Within a week, I received a cease and desist letter from the HOA attorney accusing me of defamation for speaking to the media. That's right, they were scared. And that fear meant we finally had leverage. I started speaking out, first on Facebook, then on a local community forum, then on Reddit. I posted photos of the broken ramp, the letters Liam's cast, and the HOA's official response. Within days, the story went viral. Mothers, fathers, advocates, thousands of people from around the country started commenting, sharing, sending messages of support. Some offered to rebuild the ramp. Others offered legal help. Many just said, "You're not alone. We've been there too." Karen, once proud and smug, now refused to answer the door. Her porch light stayed off. She stopped walking around with her clipboard. But the damage she caused was already rippling outward. News vans showed up. One anchor asked if she wanted to comment. She slammed the door shut. And Liam? He saw all of it. The love, the anger, the solidarity. One morning, while watching a video someone had made calling him a hero, he looked up at me and asked, "Do they know I'm just a kid?" I smiled and hugged him. "You're more than that. You're the reason people are finally listening." What started as a quiet battle with a petty HOA tyrant was now a national conversation about ableism, community cruelty, and the weaponization of rules. But it wasn't over. Because while the world watched, Karen was planning her next move. The day it happened is still burned into my memory like a scar that refuses to fade. It was a Saturday, the kind of day meant for pancakes, cartoons, and backyard laughter. Instead, it became the day everything we had tried to protect crumbled, both literally and emotionally. Liam had been having a good morning. He'd slept well, the swelling in his wrist had started to ease, and he was excited because we told him we'd take him to the local science fair that afternoon. The sky was clear, sunlight bouncing off the tops of trees like a promise. Emily and I were in the living room folding laundry while Liam sat near the porch door, lining up his little cars for a race down the ramp. He looked back and said, "Daddy, can I go outside and do just one race before we leave?" I glanced at Emily. She nodded. "Only one?" I said, smiling. "And I'll be watching." But I never made it to the door. The crash came like thunder, so sudden it didn't feel real at first. Wood snapped, metal screeched. Then Liam's scream shattered the silence like a blade through glass. I dropped the laundry basket and ran. Emily was right behind me. And there she was, Karen, in broad daylight, on our porch, holding a crowbar like it was an extension of her arm. The ramp already half splintered beneath her feet. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't flustered. She looked focused, determined. Liam, halfway down the incline, had stopped mid-roll. The front wheels of his chair perched on the section she'd just struck. The supports underneath were cracked. A moment later, with a loud snap, the entire segment buckled. Everything slowed down. Liam's arms flailed. His face twisted in panic. The chair tipped sideways as the ramp caved in. Wood fragments flew into the air. He crashed hard against the side of the porch, the wheels catching against the deck. His head missed the concrete by inches. Emily screamed. I was already moving, vaulting the last 3 steps as if time didn't exist. I dropped to my knees, heart racing, checking for blood, for broken bones, for anything. Liam was sobbing, holding his arm to his chest. The cast had cracked. Why did she break it, Daddy? He whispered. I couldn't answer. Karen took a step back, eyes wide now. Her voice cracked, trying to grasp authority from the chaos she caused. I told you, this ramp wasn't approved. It's a danger to the community. I warned you. I looked up at her, my hands shaking, rage crawling up my throat. You almost killed my son. But she didn't flinch. She turned to the few neighbors who had gathered outside, watching in stunned silence from their lawns. You all saw it. I was protecting the neighborhood. That ramp could have hurt someone else. Someone else? A child had just fallen from it. Because she attacked it. I shouted for someone to call 911. One neighbor, Mr. Collins, ran over with his phone. Another ran for towels. Karen slowly stepped off the porch and walked back toward her home without saying another word, leaving behind a trail of shattered wood and broken trust. The paramedics arrived within minutes. Liam was taken to the hospital. Emily rode with him. I stayed behind with the officers. I gave them the timeline, showed them the letters, the warnings, the photos of her lurking with that same crowbar just days earlier. One officer nodded sympathetically, the other just kept writing. I asked them what would happen next. We'll write a report, they said. That was it. She destroyed private property with a weapon while a disabled child was on it. And their plan was to write a report? The fury I felt was volcanic, but more than that, I felt helpless. The very system that was supposed to protect families like ours was now hiding behind red tape and vague bylaws. Karen wasn't afraid of us or the law. She'd done this because she knew she could get away with it. But she was wrong. I followed the ambulance to the hospital. Liam was resting but shaken. His wrist had re-fractured. The doctors said the trauma, both physical and emotional, could take weeks or even months to fully process. Emily was sitting beside him, stroking his hair gently. He's strong, she whispered. But this broke something in him. And in us. That night, I went online and uploaded everything. Photos of the broken ramp, Liam's cast, Karen's letters, the HOA fines, and a video clip from our doorbell camera that had caught part of the destruction. I didn't hold back. I told the entire story, tagging news outlets, local disability advocates, even government agencies. The post exploded. Within hours, it had thousands of shares. Within days, we were being contacted by journalists, lawyers, and families from all over the country who had their own HOA horror stories. Karen's name became synonymous with everything wrong in these suburban power structures. But the attack wasn't over. The very next morning, we received a formal letter from the HOA's attorney, not Karen's. It accused us of violating community standards, disrupting the peace, and endangering public harmony. It also threatened to fine us $1,000 per day until the ramp was fully removed and no longer visible. They were doubling down. Karen hadn't acted alone. She was just the sharp end of a bigger, blunter weapon, a homeowners association that saw compliance as more important than compassion and uniformity as more important than human lives. But this time, they picked the wrong family. And I had just started fighting. The day after Karen destroyed the ramp, the world outside our home no longer felt familiar. What was once a quiet neighborhood of waving hands and manicured lawns had become a minefield of suspicion, silence, and a creeping sense of betrayal. Liam was discharged from the hospital with a fresh cast, new bruises, and a prescription for pain medication. But no one could prescribe what to do with the fear in his eyes. He didn't want to go outside. He didn't want to use the wheelchair anymore. What if she comes back? He asked. My wife and I sat at the kitchen table that night, surrounded by police reports, hospital bills, and a cease and desist letter from the HOA's attorney. They had the audacity to claim we were causing distress in the community by broadcasting unverified allegations. But there was nothing unverified about the truth. I contacted Alicia Grant again, our disability rights attorney. This time, she brought in a full legal team: civil rights, ADA compliance, property law, specialists who had seen this playbook before. She sat across from me, eyes blazing, and said, "They've made two critical errors. One, they allowed an agent of the HOA to destroy a federally protected accessibility structure. Two, they did it while your disabled son was using it." That afternoon, we filed a lawsuit in civil court against both the HOA board and Karen Montgomery personally. The charges included destruction of medical equipment negligence, reckless endangerment of a minor violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, violation of the Fair Housing Act, emotional distress and disability discrimination. Word spread quickly. Local reporters knocked on our door for interviews. One segment aired on a regional news network. A few days later, a national morning show picked it up. Our story was now public, and people were furious. What we didn't expect, though, was how far it would reach. Disability advocates began contacting us, offering support and resources. Civil rights organizations pledged legal assistance. Several members of Congress even shared our story online, calling for stronger federal protections against HOA overreach. Karen, meanwhile, went into hiding. Her once proud daily walks through the neighborhood vanished. Her social media accounts were either deleted or wiped clean. Some neighbors tried to distance themselves from her. Others simply looked the other way, too afraid to pick sides. But the HOA, they didn't back down. They doubled the fines. Every morning, we received new letters citing obscure violations: garden hose left visible, wheelchair ramp debris lowering curb appeal, unauthorized signage. They meant the Justice for Liam sign a neighbor had left on our lawn. They were trying to intimidate us, punish us, grind us down. But something had changed. We weren't afraid anymore, and we weren't alone. A GoFundMe campaign launched by a disability rights activist raised over $75,000 in 3 weeks, enough to cover legal fees, therapy for Liam, and the construction of a brand new steel wheelchair ramp designed by professionals and reinforced beyond city code standards. Our mailbox, once a source of dread, was now filled with letters of support. One woman from Colorado wrote, "My son uses a ramp too. Thank you for standing up. You're not just helping Liam, you're helping all of us." The most powerful moment, though, came from Liam himself. One evening, we found him at the dining table with colored markers, drawing a picture of a house. Our house. And right next to it was a bright red ramp, tall, wide, unbreakable. "I'm not scared anymore," he said, "because you and Mom didn't give up." And that made everything worth it. Behind the scenes, the legal machine was building steam. Our attorney filed for an injunction to stop the HOA from issuing further fines or harassing our family. The judge granted it, the first clear victory. Then came the deposition phase. Karen was subpoenaed. She tried to evade it, claimed illness, claimed harassment. But under court order, she finally appeared. Under oath, she admitted to striking the ramp, but insisted she believed it was abandoned construction and did not know the child was on it at the time. The doorbell camera footage told a different story. In it, Liam's wheelchair is visible. His voice is heard. And Karen pausing, looking directly at him before swinging. When the judge saw the footage during pretrial review, he reportedly said, "This is one of the most disturbing misuses of HOA authority I've seen in my court." The case was now headed to full trial. But even before the verdict, change was already happening. The city council passed a resolution tightening HOA regulations around accessibility accommodations. Other neighborhoods across the state began reviewing their policies. Karen was removed from the HOA board by a special vote. And as for us, we were healing. Not just physically, but emotionally. Liam started going outside again. Slowly, cautiously. The new ramp stood strong beneath him, a symbol of resilience wrapped in steel and community love. We had fought back against a system designed to crush us, and we had won the first battle. But we weren't done yet, because what started as a fight for one boy's freedom became a war for dignity. For every family who's ever been told to stay quiet, play by the rules, and accept injustice as the price of fitting in. Something in me changed after Karen's attack, something permanent. I wasn't just a father anymore. I became an advocate, a fighter, not just for Liam, but for every family that had ever been steamrolled by a system meant to protect the privileged and punish the vulnerable. The lawsuit had been filed. The video footage had made its way through national media, and yet, somehow, the HOA was still clinging to their defense. They issued an official statement to the press saying they were deeply concerned by recent events, but stand by the principle of community compliance. It was carefully worded legalese, just enough to avoid blame, but not enough to take responsibility. That's when I knew. This wasn't going to be a quiet legal battle. It needed to become a movement. I worked with Alicia and her team to take the fight beyond the courtroom. We built a campaign, Ramps Are Rights. It was simple, bold, unapologetic. The message was clear. No child, no veteran, no person with disabilities should ever be punished for needing access. The campaign launched online with a short documentary I narrated myself. In it, I showed everything: Liam's story, Karen's attack, the HOA letters, and the video of the ramp collapse. We ended with a question: if it can happen here, it can happen anywhere. Who's next? The response was overwhelming. Parents shared stories of inaccessible schools. Veterans posted about being fined for wheelchair lifts. People of all backgrounds stepped forward with tales of quiet battles against HOAs, landlords, or even city officials, most of them previously unheard, most of them hidden behind shame or fear. Now, they weren't silent anymore. Meanwhile, in our own neighborhood, a quiet civil war was brewing. Some neighbors began leaving supportive notes on our doorstep. Others put up "We Stand" with Liam signs in their yards. But a vocal minority still clung to their fear of Karen, or at least the HOA structure she had once controlled. Then, something unexpected happened. Karen's own daughter, yes, the same Karen who destroyed my son's ramp, reached out to me privately. Her message was short: "I'm sorry for what my mother did. She's always been obsessed with control. I left home because of it. Please don't let her define our neighborhood." It shook me. Not because I forgave Karen, not yet, but because I realized this fight was bigger than any one person. It was about the damage that power without empathy can cause, and how that damage multiplies when systems reward cruelty and punish compassion. We filed a federal civil rights complaint through the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD. They opened a formal investigation into the HOA's policies, enforcement patterns, and discrimination record. It turned out we weren't their only victims. 2 years ago, a family with an autistic child had been fined for building a backyard sensory garden labeled unauthorized landscaping. Another neighbor with multiple sclerosis had been denied approval for a handrail because metal railings didn't match the community aesthetic. This was a pattern, a policy of quiet erasure. And now it was in the spotlight. Back at home, we rebuilt. With funds from the campaign and donations from strangers across the world, we installed a permanent steel ramp, industrial strength, weather resistant, and so safe it could survive an earthquake. Liam helped design it. We let him choose the color. He picked bright blue. "It's my power ramp," he said. We placed solar lights along the sides. We added his name engraved in the metal. It wasn't just accessibility anymore. It was defiance turned into art. The media returned to cover the rebuild. Liam was interviewed for the local news. His message? You don't have to be big to be brave. That line became the tagline of our campaign. And Karen? She had resigned from the HOA, but her name was now etched in a permanent record of civil lawsuits, ADA violation cases, and local government scrutiny. Her house, once the pride of the block, had become a monument to everything the neighborhood was ashamed of. She hardly showed her face anymore. Yet the HOA board still refused to back down in court. They dragged out hearings. They submitted motions to dismiss. They tried every legal trick in the book. But Alicia's team was relentless. And then came the real blow. The judge allowed our case to proceed under the pattern of discriminatory enforcement clause, meaning this wasn't just about one ramp. It was about a system-wide abuse of authority. The case was now set to become a precedent. That's when state legislators took notice. A representative in our district contacted us and asked if we'd be willing to testify at a hearing about HOA reform laws. We agreed immediately. Liam came with us to the state capitol. He wore a tiny navy blue suit and rolled himself confidently into the chamber. He was the youngest person in the room, but he stole every eye. When it was my turn to speak, I held nothing back. I spoke not just about ramps, but about respect, about the thousands of people across the country who were being told their existence was inconvenient, about families who were fined, shamed, and driven out of their homes for the simple act of trying to live with dignity. I ended with one line: if the cost of belonging to a community is my son's safety, then I don't want to belong. I want to change it. The room erupted in applause. From that day forward, we weren't just fighting back, we were fighting forward. After nearly 10 months of filings, depositions, motions, and mounting pressure from the public eye, the court date finally arrived. The case, Liam versus Willow Creek HOA and Karen Montgomery, was no longer just a local dispute. It had become a test case, watched closely by disability rights groups, legal scholars, and HOA boards across the country. We entered the courthouse on a rainy Monday morning, holding Liam's hands. He wore the same blue suit from the state hearing, his hair neatly combed, his eyes calm but alert. The new ramp, which he had once been afraid to use, had become his symbol of strength, and today he rolled through those courtroom doors like a warrior entering the battlefield. Karen sat at the defendant's table, dressed in beige, her usual smugness replaced by a thin, tight-lipped expression. Her attorney looked more tense than she did, probably because they both knew the video footage of the ramp attack had already gone viral. The judge, a stern but fair woman in her 60s, called the room to order. And then it began. Alicia started strong. She laid out every piece of evidence: the timeline of harassment, the letters from the HOA, the cease and desist threats, medical reports of Liam's injuries, video footage of Karen striking, the ramp testimonies from disability experts about the importance of accessible infrastructure, prior complaints against the HOA from other disabled residents. She painted a clear, devastating picture. This wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. It was a pattern, an intentional effort to isolate shame and remove anyone who didn't fit a narrow, able-bodied standard. Karen's defense tried to play the community standards card. They claimed the ramp violated HOA bylaws, that Karen was acting in good faith, and that no malice was intended. But then the video played, in full color, in high definition. Karen, crowbar in hand, pausing at the top of the ramp. Liam clearly visible halfway down, her eyes glancing straight at him. And then the swing, the snap, the collapse. Gasps filled the courtroom. Even the judge's face tightened. Then came my testimony. I described the day of the attack, my son's fall, the look in his eyes when he asked why someone would destroy the one thing that gave him freedom. I described the fear, the nights he couldn't sleep, the therapy, the anger. And I ended with this: I'm not asking for punishment. I'm asking for change. Because my son shouldn't be taught that his right to exist depends on a board vote. He shouldn't have to earn his way into a neighborhood just because he moves through the world on wheels. The courtroom was silent when I finished. The trial lasted 5 days. On the 6th, the verdict came in. Guilty. Karen Montgomery was found personally liable for destruction of property, endangerment of a minor, and emotional distress. The HOA was found to have violated the Fair Housing Act by failing to accommodate a resident with disabilities and for creating a hostile, discriminatory environment. The judge awarded damages in excess of $250,000 and issued a court order mandating the HOA revise its bylaws to comply with federal accessibility standards within 90 days. Karen attempted to appeal. It was denied. And just like that, the fight was over. But the story didn't end there. Because that courtroom ruling didn't just rebuild Liam's ramp, it rebuilt something in all of us. Liam smiled more. He started painting again. We created a backyard space with accessible garden beds. He told me he wanted to be a lawyer someday, so I can help kids like me. And our neighborhood? It changed too. The new HOA board held a public apology ceremony. They renamed the small park at the end of our street Liam's Way, a symbolic gesture, but one that Liam beamed about for days. Karen sold her house within 3 months of the ruling. And as for me, I finally felt peace. Not because we won, but because we never backed down. We turned pain into purpose, fear into fuel, and silence into something powerful. Justice. Sometimes justice doesn't roar, it whispers. It's not always a dramatic gavel drop or a public apology. Sometimes it's the quiet strength of a child rolling confidently down his ramp again, unafraid. Sometimes it's a father finally sleeping through the night, knowing he didn't fail his son. And sometimes it's a once hostile neighborhood hanging balloons on a ramp they once tried to tear down. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was a war for recognition, for the simple human truth that accessibility is not a privilege. It is a right. My son taught me that, not through words, but through how he held on again and again, even when the world told him he didn't belong. Liam didn't just survive that fall. He rose. And because of him, others will too. Across the country, people have reached out to say they were inspired to stand up to their HOAs, their landlords, their cities. They built ramps without waiting for permission. They fought back against silence. And they won. That's the thing about injustice. Once you shine a light on it, it shrinks. To every parent who's been told their child is an inconvenience, to every person who's been fined for simply trying to live, to every kid like Liam who's ever asked, "Why don't they want me here?" This story is for you. Let them say what they want about bylaws and rules. We'll keep building ramps. Because the truth is, a ramp isn't just a slope, it's a bridge. Between exclusion and acceptance. Between shame and pride, between silence and a voice. And we found ours. If this story moved you, help us spread the message. Share Liam's story. Support someone in your community. Or just ask your HOA a simple question. What are we doing to include everyone? Because the next child who needs that ramp might be yours. This is the HOA stories. And we'll keep telling them until no one has to.